and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Deja Q, which is episode 13 of season 3 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek as determined by my user polls. The episode to win my latest poll for my Next Generation videos is Deja Q. So Deja Q is the episode in which Q is turned into a human being and kicked out of Continuum, and he goes aboard the Enterprise to seek refuge against the enemies that one would like to get revenge on him now that he's not omniscient anymore and is vulnerable. And meanwhile, the Enterprise is trying to save a planet for a moon that's about to collapse, and they don't really have time to deal with Q's nonsense, as every time they try to help the planet, the aliens attack the ship in order to get the Q. So Q, finally, after Data almost sacrifices himself to save Q, Q decides to sacrifice himself to save the Enterprise, and this leads the other Qs to see that he's changed, and they give him his powers back, and not very much to Picard's liking, Q celebrates and thanks Picard for his help. So, I really love this episode. I talked about this before. I think this is I think it's an underrated Q episode. I think I've heard a lot of people sort of dismiss this episode as kind of just okay or even not good, which I don't get. See, to me, this is the first great Q episode. Now, I like the character of Q. The first Q episode I ever saw was Cupid, because I watched season 4 first before I seen anything else. Like, I actually saw it several times. In fact, that's probably something I can mention, is that maybe part of the reason why I like this episode so much to me is this episode is kind of like a white whale. And a lot of episodes of season 3 were, and I talked about this in other videos. I first started watching Star Trek Next Generation like 91 when season 5 was airing, but season 4 was the most recent season to hit reruns, so for some reason they would play season 4 over and over and over again, and sometimes they would even go 1 and 2, but it was like almost a year before I saw season 3, so I kept hearing about all these episodes in season 3, like Yesterday's Enterprise, or Data having a daughter, or Worf getting discombobulated, which I've seen the sequels to that, and they were all kind of like white whales, and this was one of the biggest ones to me that I desperately wanted to see, because I heard about an episode where another Q appeared, played by Corbin Bernstein from LA Law, and and then I heard like, oh, don't get your hopes up, he was only in the episode for like 3 minutes, but still, I heard of like this Q2 and this Q getting turned into human, and it was like a really long time before I actually saw it, and I really loved it. To me, I don't know, I think if you have high anticipation for something and it's not that good, then it actually sets you up to be more disappointed if it's not as great as you're hoping in your mind. So the fact that this actually managed to live up to my high expectations of the episode, actually, I think speaks well of it. Now, I think this is the first great Q episode, because season 3 of Next Generation, and I talked about this, and many people talked about this actually, was when Next Generation really got great. That the first 2 seasons were not so good. So basically, that was the show. Like, the show Star Trek Next Generation was not a very good show until this season came out. And then it became a great show and became one of the most memorable shows ever. And that turnaround happened in season 3. And this is the first time we see Q in season 3. And honestly, I don't think Q was that great of a character and before this episode. Now, I know a lot of people will disagree with me, because a lot of people love Q Who and will hold that as one of the best episodes of Next Generation. I don't. I think that episode is average at best. And the best thing about that episode is not Q, it's the Borg. In fact, I don't think Q worked at all in that episode. I don't think it was a good Q episode, period. In fact, part of the reason why I don't like this episode as much as a lot of people do is because of Q. It's because of Q's involvement, which I didn't like and I didn't buy. And then you have Encounter at Farpoint, which I've reviewed already, which was Q was just like a stereotypical all-powerful being who's being a dick. And then you had Hayden Q, which, to be fair, at least had him more as a, played on his more playful side rather than being an out-and-out villain, but he was still overall a villain. To me, so this, and even in Q Who, he was still, he was being a bit playful like he was in Hide and Q, and that exploded more, but still he was being kind of a villain asshole. I mean, he flung the Enterprise in front of the Borg where 8 people got killed, so he's still the villain. And this, to me, this marks the first episode that played him in a more comedic light, and I think that's where they worked. I think this episode saved his character. Because of that. And not only that, I think this is probably the best comedic appearance of Q ever. So much like Season 3, which I think is the best season of Next Generation, not only did it turn around the show and vastly improve it from the bad thing it was, it actually remains the best. They did it so good the first time, it remains the best example. And I think that that's true of Q Who. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that I'm sorry, not Q Who, Deja Q. But to be clear, I'm not saying Deja Q is the best Q episode, because that would be either All Good Things or Tapestry. And both those episodes are not comedic, though. They're more drama. So I think Deja Q is the best comedic episode of Next Generation. Now, Deja Q has a slight dramatic tint, just like Tapestry has a slight comedic tint. Is there a John Luck Pickard here? And the reason why Q, the comedy and the drama blend so well in episodes like Tapestry and All Good Things is because they managed to rework this character in this episode, and Cupid, which I know a lot of other people hate Cupid, which, to be fair, I don't think Cupid is that great. I would probably say it's okay, but I don't hate it. I still think it's much better. It's a better Q. Q's much better in that episode and this episode, and they really reformed and made. I mean, I think without this episode, Q is a dead character. Q is not a very interesting villain, and you don't bring him back anymore. I don't think Q Who was enough. I'm sorry, and I don't think Hide and Q was enough. I think he was a bad character at that stage. It wasn't until this episode that focused on the comedic side of it and said, hey, he could do great comedy. He doesn't work very well as a menacing villain, but he'd be hilarious as kind of a comedic sort of thorn in the side to the Enterprise. And that's exactly correct. And that's exactly how they play him for the rest of his role time in the Star Trek franchise. Even straight dramatic episodes like Tapestry and All Good Things still play him, and Death Wish on Voyager, which is another great dramatic episode. They still play him in that comedic thorn in the side kind of way that was first developed here. So this episode saved Q. That's the first thing I want to say. But, before I get into more praise in this episode and why I really like this episode, I want to actually, I usually save my nitpicks and complaints at the end of the review, but actually this time around I want to get it out of the way because there is one huge problem I have with this episode that holds it back a little bit, and it annoys me every time I watch this episode, which is an otherwise great episode, is the way that Picard and crew behave and completely, almost to an absurd and obtuse level, disbelieve that what Q is actually saying. That Q is actually a human being. To me, that's bad writing, because I don't buy that it makes no sense, first of all, that the crew would react in that way, and I don't buy that they would. Now, to be clear, their initial doubt when Q first appears on the bridge of the Enterprise, I buy that. That makes sense. It's just they kept it going for an absurdly long... In fact, at the very end of the episode, towards the very end, Picard even says, I'm still not sure I believe you're telling the truth. And I'm just really, Picard? What the fuck? I mean, here's my reasoning on that. Is as I said, Q was a very menacing, very villainous character before this episode. So this is what they know Q has. They know him from Encounter at Farpoint, where he put humanity on trial and threatened to sort of wipe out all humanity unless they return back to Earth. There was Hidden Q, where he forced them to play these games where they got killed, and then he tried to manipulate Riker into becoming this arrogant Q. And then there's Q where he flung them in front of the Borg, and because Picard wouldn't let him join the crew, and he sort of refused to help him, and 18 people died. So that's what they know him from before this episode. In each of those cases, he was being a menace, he was being villainous, he was being interfering, I think they actually let him off lightly for being responsible. I think when they found out he was human hair, they should have put him on trial for murdering those 18 people, or at least being an accomplice in their deaths. But plot convenience, whatever. And a lot of people argue that, but he was doing them a favor by having them be aware of the dangers out there. Yeah, but those 18 people died aren't going to appreciate that favor very much, are they? Anyway, sorry. But anyway, yeah, I would put him on trial. But anyway, regardless of all that, my whole point is, in each of those three cases, Q did not lie to them. He did not deceive them. He was always, forthright with his intentions. Now, the one sort of caveat to that would be Hidden Q, where he didn't outright say his intentions was to make Riker a Q. He tried to have these, let's play these games. Games? Did somebody say game? and put them on the planet where they just got, instead of playing games, they were just attacked by these pigs and American Revolution uniforms or whatever. Which I don't really consider that a game, so I think that's the worst part of the episode. But anyway, regardless, he kind of sidestepped the issue, and that what it was really about was Riker becoming a god. But he never lied. He never said, I'm not here to make Riker a god, or whatever. And once it was time for him to reveal his intentions, he did, and he never misled Picard or anyone about his intentions to make Riker a god. And also with Encounter at Farpoint, he was very forthright. This is a trial. You're on trial. And in fact, he would reappear a lot of times to remind them, hey, your humanity's on trial, don't forget. And in Q-Who, he outright said, I'm here to warn you about the dangers. You won't let me join the crew, so here, I'm going to warn you about the dangers. I'm warning you. And he even showed up and when the Borg beamed on the ship and started telling them about the Borg. So, here's the whole point of all that is he never deceived them. He never outright lied, and especially, you could say the Hidden Q thing, but that doesn't even compare to what they automatically are accusing him. They're accusing him of showing up and saying, I'm human now, but being totally full of shit. And that's completely inconsistent with his character. Now, as I said, I will grant you, because even though he never outright lied or deceived them before, he was still a thorn in their side and still did a lot of asshole things. So I could buy that initial reaction of, oh yeah, really? But when it got to the point where it should have become obvious to everyone, and they were still being obtuse about it, I think they were being dumb, and I think that's bad writing. Now, by the way, we get that joke where Q says, what do I have to do to prove I'm mortal? And Worf is like, die. Part of what makes this episode so hilarious. And all that's fine with me, by the way. But the point to which I think they should have at least started to bend in their steadfast belief that Q was lying, at least would have considered more, actually it's way more likely he's not lying, is when they locked Q up in the in the brig. Now, Worf took Q to the brig, and Q even's like, okay, let me ask you a question without puzzling your intellect too much. If I really had my powers, would I allow you to lock me in this brig? And Worf's like, oh, you fooled us too much before, Q. And I think later Picard shows up, and Picard is still doubting. He's like, go fix the moon, use your powers. And Q's like, if you think I had powers, why would you really think I would let you lock me up in here? And Picard's like, well, if it served your purposes. They are both being absolutely obtuse and ignorant to the type of person that Q is, if you can even call him a person. But to the type of, I'll just use the word person for now, but to the type of person that Q is, and this is what they should know from their experiences with Q, is that he's arrogant. He thinks he's tough shit. He thinks he's the best, and he's very narcissistic, I think is a good word, and doesn't really care about others, and all he cares about is himself. He's very self-centered, very egotistical, very narcissistic. And so when they say shit like, oh, you would demean yourself if it served your purpose. No! That goes against his character. He absolutely wouldn't. His narcissism and feeling of self-importance is more important than any sort of trick, which actually he never pulled any trick like this in the past, so they're basing it off of nothing. And if they were really basing it off of their knowledge of him, they would say outright, yeah, there's no way he would allow himself to be locked up if he had anything to do. If he could help in any way, shape, or form, there is no fucking way he would actually allow us to lock him up in the brig. And they were being obtuse and idiotic, quite frankly, for not realizing that. In fact, I think it was right before Picard visited Q in the brig. So it was after Worf locked him up in the brig. They had a senior staff meeting. And Picard, and they were floating, like, why is Q doing this? Why is he pretending? Why is he putting on this act? And then Picard floats the idea that, oh, maybe, possibly, just small little possibility out there, like 0.02% chance, perhaps, maybe, he's telling the truth. And immediately Riker's like, oh my God, what are you, an idiot? Of course not. How could you even consider that? I mean, that's stupid. If Riker's being a moron, like they're basing this off of nothing. Like what the actual conversation in the senior staff meeting should have been like, it should have been the opposite. It should have been like, okay, Q's locked up in the brig, so it's pretty damn certain that he's actually telling the truth and he's mortal. I mean, maybe there's a small % chance that he's just lying and fucking with us, but he's never actually deceived us before, and I don't think there's any way someone who is as egotistical and self-important as Q would allow himself to be locked up like this under any circumstances. So I think it's definitely the most likely the case that he is actually mortal now. So how do we deal with that? That's what the meeting should have been like, and it bothers me the high hell the way that they act like. And as I said, even later in the episode, like other characters like Crusher would point out, well, I still don't believe that you are human, when she's fucking treating him as a human being for having back pains. And Picard, as I said, like towards the end of the episode, is like, "Oh, I'm not convinced that you're not actually lying to us, and this isn't some joke." I mean, that's probably the dumbest thing Picard has ever said in the entire series of the show. And Guinan was the only one who wasn't being this obtuse moron and immediately recognized that, because when she saw him in 10-4 and Data's like, oh, the crew still doesn't believe that this is the case, and she's like, oh no, I believe it, and stabs him because she knows that Q would never demean himself like that he's too arrogant and self-important. But the thing is, everyone should have done that, not just Guinan. Anyway, so it bothers me to high hell. But as I said, I just wanted to get that out of the way, because as I said, I actually do really like this episode. I do think it's a great episode. I think it is, and I included this on my countdown for one of the funniest episodes of Star Trek. Even though it's not like a straight up comedy, it's not like a laugh out loud sort of comedy. But they do sprinkle in jokes here and there, like the whole door thing, or like I don't like the thing with Q saying I'll have 10 chocolate sundaes. Like they just this is, as I said, this is the birth of Q's sort of comedic side, and he just works so incredibly well in the dynamic they set up in this episode. And of course, talking about humor, I gotta mention that final scene after Q regains his powers, which that scene was fucking hilarious. It's probably the funniest Q scene ever, where he shows up with the mariachi band and starts and when Picard sees Q disappear with the Calamari, it's like, well, I guess that's the end of Q, and then he reappears. It was like, "Oh, contraire, mi Capitan, he's back!" and starts playing the band. Oh my god, that was so hilarious, and especially when Q's like snaps. I was like, Riker, my good fortune is your good fortune. Snaps, and these two beautiful women by his side, sort of stroking him. He's like, I don't need your fantasy women. And that's funny. Riker would have that attitude because he goes on the holodeck and has fantasy women there. Doesn't have a problem with that. But I suppose maybe it's because it's coming from Q, who he doesn't like. But anyway. So he snaps his finger and the women go to Worf, and Worf just looks at them. It's hilarious, and especially when Q like makes the women disappear and Worf kind of looks sad. He's like, oh. It's like small touches like that are hilarious in the way Picard like is reacting to him. It's like, Q! He's like so pissed off. He was like, but I feel like celebrating. He was, I don't! Oh my god, it was so hilarious, and so was the ending where after Q saves the moon and makes Data laugh. Picard's like, well, maybe there's like a residue of humanity in Q after all, and he goes to do a signature engage, but instead Q snaps the cigar in the smoke with his head coming out of it, saying, "Don't count on it, Picard." Like, that's perfect. That is beautiful. Absolutely great comedy. But part of the reason why I like this episode so much is it's not just the comedy, it's the character story, and the main plot is actually a good drama as well. And I think this might be one of my favorite sort of character interactions they use with Q, like ever. Is the sort of relationship that he builds with Data in this episode, which I think it's really poignant. I mean, Q is kind of being an arrogant ass to everyone. Like, he goes to engineering and was like, "All right, everyone, this is what we're gonna be doing," but Data kind of is the only one who sort of shows patience for him for that, and they sort of build this rapport where Q actually comes to appreciate Data, and the fact that Data saves Q's life. It risks himself to save Q, and when I don't think anyone else would do that. And he starts to. That's what sort of gives this character change. Like, this is what is the sort of driving force that allowed him to return to the continuum, is because it gave him this character change where he realized what an arrogant ass he was being and how selfish he was being, and it made him feel ashamed. Like, I think that was like a powerful moment where he went to Picard. It's like, it makes me feel ashamed, and Picard's like, Q, I'm not your father, Professor, confessor, or whatever, which makes sense that Picard would act that way because Q should be on trial for killing 18 people. Anyway, but then so that leads him to do that, to sacrifice himself. I think it was actually a powerful character story too, and I think The Data laughing, I mean, I think that's actually a funny scene too that builds off of the comedy of the whole ending thing, but it also is a great character moment for Data. I think, and I love how, Q says, I want to, you saved my life. I want to give you a gift. And Data's like, oh, if your intention is to make me human, and Q interrupts him, like, no, don't worry about that. I would never curse you by doing that. Which, again, is kind of funny and laying off of his experience, saying how much he hated being human. But he's like, but he gives him something a lot more simple, a lot more subtle, and a lot more sort of things that human beings and most people take for granted, is having a good laugh. And it was, I think, not only was it funny, but I think it was a very beautiful moment, I dare say, where Data was just started laughing hilariously. And finally, after he's done, Jordy's like, why are you laughing? He's like, I don't know. It was a wonderful feeling, though. And even though, like, the way he says it, the way that line's delivered, but it was a wonderful feeling, because it puts the emphasis that Data has never really had a feeling before. He usually doesn't feel things. And yet he was, and that was just a great experience for him. Yeah. So I think that was a beautiful moment. So I think, the only blemish on this episode is the way that all the characters are being so obtuse and thinking Q's lying when that's completely inconsistent with this character. But other than that, like, this episode is hilarious. It's great. It's fun, and it's powerful, and it's emotional, and it's a great character story at that. So that is the makings of a great episode. So my rating for Deja Q out of 10 is a 9. Excellent. I did have to mark it down a point because of that obtuseness, but other than that, it's a great episode. Like, it is a powerful character story, a funny character story, and probably one of the best uses of Q. Definitely, this is the episode that saved Q, no doubt. Anyway, that is it for my review of Deja Q. I shall return to review more Star Trek episodes, as well as reviewing other shows like The Expanse, Breaking Bad, The Outer Limits, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.